Thank you, Natalia. Just thinking of our time in Nickel West, that's cathode. I'm now in anode, which probably makes me bipolar. Add some lithium and I'll feel pretty good about that. Probably the big thing for us, I've knocked a few slides out of this to try and compress the time slot, but the big news for us is this week we were able to talk about a strategic anode participant coming onto our share register in the form of POSCO Limited, and that's significant in two ways. Firstly, we have money, and secondly, we now have a channel to market for our product. And Mark, thanks for all the talk about the growth in graphite there, but two things came out of Mark's talk was the enormous potential in the graphite space that really hasn't had the attention that you get in the cathode space. And the other one is the minute you move into anode material in batteries, it gets complex pretty quickly. And that's the other advantage we have with POSCO, is that they are in that space. So for us, it's a case of follow the leader. A little bit about Mahenge. We're ranked number 4 in terms of resource tonnage. We're ranked number 2 in terms of reserves. We've got a project in central Tanzania, and it's actually a pretty unique block of rock in the graphite world. We want to talk a little bit about why it becomes such a unique piece of material. Our development strategy at Mahenge and getting graphite right is a particularly difficult challenge. With a market size of about 1.2 million tonnes a year natural flake, if you develop a project that's too big, you exceed the market capacity to absorb your product. So probably about 100,000 tonne a year of net production would be the maximum limit you could do in any increment. If it's too small, it becomes too small to be investable. So you're sort of trying to squeeze it in there. The next thing you've got to try and do here is come up with how do you get margin in this thing. Now we've got a margin in there at the moment, a basket price of $1,300 a tonne. That's at 97.5%. Standard concentrate's 95. That would sell in our basket at the moment at about $1,000 a tonne. The nuance in the basket price is you need a mix of fines, because fines goes into the battery supply chain, and that's where there are balance sheets. So if you're trying to look for an industry partner in this space, you need enough fines to have a meaningful volume to attract a partner. But the problem with the fines, it is the cheapest part of the basket. So you need enough flake to give you some margin. The problem when you get all the flake in there, you're dealing with discrete manufacturers, all of which are reasonably in their own scale, reasonably small, and you can't find a balance sheet there to help you develop your project. So you're trying to manage the size of production along with your basket composition to find the right size project. And that really comes out in this slide here. As you can see, in the world of graphite, we've got most of the demand sits in refractories, and we've got batteries growing quickly. That's 30% per annum versus refractory is a couple of percent per annum. The unspoken bit about the refractories bit is it's steel mill refractories, right? So this is why China dominates the graphite business. You've got a lot of steel mills, therefore you've got a lot of refractories. The nuance in here with steel intensity increasing as we're coming out, where I reflected in iron ore pricing, we're coming up to a next generation of steel mills that need relining. These mills were commissioned principally in 14 and 15. That led to the graphite spike in price at that point in time. They're due for relining. Individually, each one of these blast furnaces will take something like 20,000 tonnes of graphite. So as we start to reline furnaces in graphite, we're going to see some interesting action around that refractory portion of the demand curve. If you look at the fine material, typically that's going to sell for around $450 to $550 a tonne, depending on your individual specification. If you go to the large flake material, it's $2,000 a tonne. So what you're trying to do here is try come up with a basket that comprises some fines to get an anode producer on board and enough flake to give you some margin. We're lucky at Mahenge, we seem to have got the Goldilocks point. It's about 30 to 40% fines, and the rest of it is high value large flake. So what differentiates Mahenge? It's a unique geology. Graphite's a metamorphic mineral, it's a metasediment, it gets compressed, and over time, as this gets compressed and cooked, you have fluids go through the ore body, it creates a secondary mineralisation. Mahenge is a dry system. We have a very low level of secondary mineralisation. It has two things for us. It gives us an incredibly high-grade concentrate. We can go to 99% by flotation. We've demonstrated that at pilot plant scale. It also means we only need 3 stages of polishing to get to a saleable product. Every time you polish, you turn large flake, the high-value material, into low-value small flake. I'll contrast 3 stages of polishing with a typical Chinese circuit, which has got up to 18 stages of polishing. And this is why the Chinese industry dominates the fines portion of the graphite industry. And it also is why the price point at the fines is set by Team China. The other unique thing about Mahenge is we are proximal to Ifakara. Ifakara is on the Tanzanian-Zambian railway. So if you start to think about, we're able to take material, truck material from site to Ifakara, containerise, down to Dar, which is one of the biggest container terminals on the east coast of Africa, and straight into China. We did a mark-to-market exercise a couple of weeks ago about how much it was going to cost to go from Dar to China, because we're getting concerned about global freight rates. $30 a tonne. I can't move stuff from Fremantle to Kalgoorlie for $30 a tonne. We're moving from Dar to China for less than $30 a tonne. So we have massive, massive freight advantage, and it really matters in the semi-bulk industry. The other thing that really starts to come out here as we start to look at the ESG implications of where we're at is with this super high-grade deposit we've got, we really minimise the amount of chemical intervention required. So that's a major benefit for us. But we're able to now, with Mahenge, develop supply chain diversity. And that's beginning to be very, very important when you're talking about non-China sources of anode material. We're proximal to hydropower, so we'll run a graphite mine for batteries running off hydropower. We're looking at being able to dry stack, which means we have low water demand. We're not competing with our traditional sustainable agriculture people for water. And finally, when we bag this stuff and send it to our producers, it is a high-grade concentrate, low levels of chemical intervention, cost advantage, but also a significant ESG advantage. There's a lot of talk about graphite, and graphite is ridiculously easy to find. It's conductive. It'll light up on an EM like a neon light. To get a commercial graphite project is diabolically hard. There's a lot of work. So what we need to do, and the pathway we've been through, is to work through a series of study stages. So we've drilled, discovery, pilot plant. This is the one that most people try and miss. We've done 2 pilot plants, 110 tonnes. Now we have POSCO's funding. We're going to run a 3rd qualification plant, 500 tonnes. That's going to produce 40 tonnes of concentrate that we then put in the hands of our customers for final qualification. You cannot qualify a graphite project on drill core. There isn't enough to qualify your project unless you're prepared to back yourself and go all the way downstream and hope you can sell a product at the end of the day. So it's a very intensive study exercise. Where we are now, Tanzania's got a lot of press. We're waiting to resolve the free carried interest with the government. We believe that's going to happen reasonably soon. Once we're through that phase, we're into financing and then moving into construction. But I cannot understate the challenge in this space is the study work you need to do and the amount of pilot plant work you need to do. Runway now, where we're looking at, look, we're talking about large-scale qualification. There'll be pretty important news flow out of that because we're taking this all the way through POSCO's supply chain. So we're going to, first time we'll see our products sit in EVs. We're taking all of our contracts now, our price volume relationships, we're taking those into binding contracts. We need to do that as we front-end load the finance process. We've also resolved the government free carried interest. You know, we update our engineering costs. Our engineering now is about 18 months, 2 years out of date. If this was in Australia, I'd be thinking about a 15 to 20% increase in those engineering costs. That's how much it's shifted. In Tanzania, I think we've got a much better chance of holding those costs, but it's a piece of work we need to do. And then we're going to transition that into gross maximum price contracts. And once we've got a GMP price contract, we're able to then turn around and really lock in financing term sheets. Again, it's the detail in this work that matters. A couple of things we've learnt. This is some scar tissue we'll share with you. At the end of the day, geology drives your basket. It's your geology that drives your concentrate grade, and it drives the sizing in your basket and the average sizing in the basket. And there's a Goldilocks point. You need enough flake to add value. You need enough fines to make you attractive to a cornerstone in the anode space. We're lucky we've got a 70-30 split. It's the margin curve that drives your project value. So we talk about copper or nickel, we talk about where we sit on the cost curve because copper and nickel is fungible. Graphite's not fungible, so we've got a margin curve which talks about your basket price, and you've got a cost curve that talks about how much it costs to make that basket. Access to road, access to rail, access to grid hydro are all about getting yourself down the bottom of that cost curve. Graphite is not a base metal. There is not an LME grade A graphite term, which really means the product that you make is unique to your mine. So that one of the terminologies we use in the graphite space is a signature. Each mine has a unique signature. End customers have to physically modify their plant to work with your product. So once you've qualified, and this is all about talking a customer into modifying their plant so they will buy your product, you've got a customer for life, but the amount of material you need to do that is significant. So we're currently setting up to produce another 40 tonnes of concentrate as front-end loading our marketing. And the other one I'd point out is while we are talking about ESG, it is increasingly across the whole of the value chain. And it's more than just the mine selling concentrate. This talks about how much chemical interference is required to get your concentrate up to SPG, or indeed how much carbon is used in transporting stuff around the globe. So you need to take a whole of ESG view on this. Again, hydropower, access to rail, low strip ratio mines all feed into the bottom line on that space. A little bit about POSCO. Look, number 4 in the world steel industry. On that basis, being Korean-based, they've got a better than average view of what's going on in the EV market. POSCO have been very strategic. They've rolled up, they've got involved in Pilbara, picked up Galaxy Lithium. They've bought 30% of the Ravensthorpe laterite plant. They've picked up 15% of BlackRock. You don't need to be Einstein to join the dots on that. Their dominant strategy is to take a small cornerstone position in the supply chain and rely on people to focus on what they do. So our conversations with POSCO has always been, we'll do the mining, you do the manufacturing. And that allows us to specialise and be best in class at what we do. The money shot, financing Mahenge, how hard is this? It's actually getting easier, courtesy of the battery boom. But I think importantly, the approach we've done on this is our EPCM syndicate and POSCO. POSCO doing a prepay of around about 20 odd million. EPCM syndicate's about a 30 million deferred credit, so it's kind of the Harvey Norman buy now, pay later. But that accounts for 50 million out of 116 million capex. If we put the sort of thin cap ratio on that, all up, we need about 140 mil. 40 mil of that will be equity. So it leaves us with about a 50 mil debt gap at the moment we need to cross. Now, a 50 mil debt gap against the project can produce up to a $200 million a year EBITDA, self-funded, isn't a bad outcome. So we're kind of very, very confident about where we are with the financing, provided we can resolve free carried interest. And again, that's a work in progress. It's moving ahead quickly. And very quickly, that's Mahenge, bought in on time and on schedule. Thank you, Natalia.